Welcome back! My name is Ballerscuba. This is Video Games Over Time! We are still in 1985. Today, we're going to talk about professional wrestling. The history of professional wrestling is long, complicated, and often a matter of opinion. Almost everything I say here is the best I can find, but I make no guarantee that anything is fully accurate, and obviously I will be glossing over lots of details. That's just the nature of professional wrestling. Professional wrestling is primarily based on the sport of wrestling, but there are some key differences. Rather than a professional version of the sport of wrestling, professional wrestling is a form of theater revolving around mock combat that was initially based on the sport of wrestling. Over time, however, professional wrestling has adopted a style and culture all its own. The history of professional wrestling could be said to start in the early to mid-1800s in Europe. In Britain and Ireland during this time, wrestlers would wrestle one another in competitions and challenge members of the public to wrestle for money. Greco-Roman wrestling, a type of wrestling that did not allow holds below the waist, became popular throughout Europe. The history of professional wrestling could be said to start in the 1860s as the sport of wrestling became popular in both the United States and Mexico. In the United States, catch wrestling, a form of wrestling that did allow for holds below the waist, started gaining popularity after the Civil War. The history of professional wrestling could be said to start in 1863 in Mexico. There, Enrique Ugartequilla developed and invented Mexican lucha libre, or free wrestling, which was derived from Greco-Roman wrestling rules. Because of the nature of professional wrestling and its secretive difference from legitimate wrestling contests, it is impossible to say when exactly the origins of professional wrestling started. It truly depends on small details and on historical information that is no longer available. But no matter where the origins of professional wrestling started, the sport gained in popularity in these three main regions. It is said that professional wrestling was the most popular sport in certain regions in the late 1800s. While it is said that these professional wrestling matches started as legitimate wrestling contests, by the turn of the century, nearly all of these contests were choreographed and predetermined. The purpose of this was to make the matches more entertaining and to protect the wrestlers from injury. During this transition, professional wrestling would sometimes work in carnival shows. These would include challenges to visitors to try their luck against the champion, as well as showcases between two professional wrestlers. Professional wrestling attitude and some terminology is said to come out of carnival culture. Reporters would continually try to expose the competition as staged in the early 1900s, but professional wrestling would continue to grow. One of the early big names in the sport would be George Hackenschmidt, a Russian-born legitimate wrestler. Hackenschmidt toured through Europe and the United States, wrestling in both legitimate and staged contests. Hackenschmidt won the first recognized professional wrestling World Heavyweight Championship, the World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, in New York City in 1905. Hackenschmidt would ultimately lose the title to another early big name in the sport, Frank Gotch, in 1908. Gotch, an American wrestler, is said to be one of the best legitimate wrestlers of all time, and is said to have been unbeatable at his peak. Gotch retired in 1913, still the holder of the championship belt. The championship would then change hands a few times, but ultimately the combination of the retirement of Frank Gotch and the outbreak of World War I would stop the rise of professional wrestling in the 1910s. The public also became more aware of professional wrestling's lack of legitimacy, and the attraction would fade in popularity quickly. Instead of trying to restore professional wrestling's legitimacy, professional wrestling leaned further into showmanship. In the 1920s, the Gold Dust Trio, made up of Ed Lewis, Billy Sandow, and Toots Mondt, started their own promotion. This promotion established several standards of professional wrestling, including time limits on matches, flashier new holds, signature moves, tag team wrestling, and referee distractions, all designed to make the matches more exciting. The Gold Dust Trio would also keep wrestlers employed for months or years at a time, instead of hiring traveling wrestlers for a single match. This allowed them to create rivalries and stories that would span several matches. The Gold Dust Trio would gain popularity through the 1920s, particularly on the East Coast of the United States. This would spawn other promotions who would imitate this new style of wrestling throughout the United States. The impact of the Gold Dust Trio's new style of professional wrestling would reach the United Kingdom. A new promotion, All In Wrestling, started in the 1920s. They crowned Atal Oakley, one of the founders of the promotion, the first British heavyweight champion. This new style of wrestling became very popular in England. At its peak, it is said that wrestling had 40 regular venues in London alone. However, British promoters struggled to find skilled wrestlers to participate, so they switched to alternate methods of entertainment, including more violent styles of wrestling, such as weapons and chairs, as well as women wrestlers and mud-filled rings. As a result, the London County Council banned professional wrestling in the late 1930s. In 1933 in Mexico, Salvador Luteroth founded the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, the first national wrestling promotion in Mexico. This was in response to professional wrestling in Mexico primarily being a local production, particularly along the US border, where the main attractions would typically be American wrestlers brought down over the border by foreign promoters. This promotion grew in popularity quickly. Mexican wrestling saw perhaps its biggest stars early on. In 1942, a silver-masked wrestler named El Santo, Spanish for the Saint, made his debut, quickly becoming the most popular wrestler in Mexico. He became a folk hero and a symbol of justice, and would go on to make appearances in comic books and movies. This era also saw Gory Guerrero and the Blue Demon rise to prominence in Mexico. In the United States and Canada, other promotions would gain popularity in their relative areas. These would become known as the territories. These territories would start to get television shows as early as the late 1940s, typically airing on local stations. In 1948, the territories joined in a loose association known as the National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA. The NWA decided to unite all the territories' championships together into a single world heavyweight title. For their champion, the NWA chose Lou Thesz. Lou Thesz was an American professional wrestler and one of the biggest stars in the St. Louis territory. He was known for being a good legitimate wrestler, which might be necessary to prevent any of the other territorial champions from double-crossing him in the ring in an attempt to win. Between 1949 and 1956, Lou Thesz went to the territories to wrestle and defeat their champions, effectively merging all the territories' championships into the NWA World Heavyweight title. The territories would continue to grow their audience on television rapidly, even earning national television shows. During this time, the promoters showcased the drama of the production and would highlight comedic and colorful characters. Wrestling television shows would pop up in Japan, Mexico, and England as well. However, this quickly declined due to a seen overexposure of wrestling. Estimates state that there were over 2,000 active wrestlers at the time. The ratings fell, and the national television networks dropped the shows, although some local television stations would keep airing wrestling. Throughout the 50s and 60s, the NWA would be the biggest name in American, Mexican, and Japanese professional wrestling. But several of the territories began breaking away from the NWA, seeing it as holding back innovative changes in the sport and seeing some of their decisions as hurting individual territories. The major territories to leave were the American Wrestling Association, or AWA, which was based out of Minnesota, and the Capital Wrestling Corporation, which was based out of New York. Verne Gagne, who owned the AWA, became the AWA World Heavyweight Champion after leaving the NWA in 1960. Gagne left after wanting to win the NWA Championship and being denied. The Capital Wrestling Corporation, led by Vincent J. McMahon, would break from the NWA in 1963 and rename itself the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWWF. They left because they wanted their biggest star, the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, to become NWA champion, but that was also denied. The WWWF would make Buddy Rogers the inaugural WWWF World Heavyweight Champion in 1963, only to have him lose it to Bruno Sammartino 36 days later due to Buddy Rogers suffering a heart attack before the match. Sammartino, on the other hand, would hold on to the championship for almost 8 years. During the 1960s, both the AWA and WWWF would expand greatly. The AWA would become the largest and most successful territory, stretching throughout the Midwest all the way to California. The WWWF would secure a television deal and would sell out shows in Madison Square Garden by 1970. However, their champion, Bruno Sammartino, would lose the title and leave the company in 1971. Without that draw, the WWWF struggled and rejoined the NWA in 1971. Things began to turn around for the WWWF in 1973 with the debut of Andre the Giant. Andre, a French wrestler that stood a staggering 7'4", 224 centimeters, had done professional wrestling in other promotions, including the AWA. However, the WWWF managed to keep his services and used his popularity to continue to thrive in their territory. Overall, though, wrestling struggled in America in the 1970s, and the NWA would become the most powerful organization again. In Japan, though, wrestling gained popularity. 2 promotions, All Japan Pro Wrestling, founded by Giant Baba, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, founded by Antonio Inoki, formed in 1972. These 2 promotions split off from the Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance, which was part of the NWA. The end of the 70s brought success to the wrestling industry in America. One of the NWA's territories, Georgia Championship Wrestling, or GCW, would become the first nationally broadcast wrestling program on cable television on TBS in 1979. By 1981, GCW's show was the most watched show on cable. In 1979, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation would shorten its name to the World Wrestling Federation, or WWF. Vincent J. McMahon's son, Vincent K. McMahon, would start a new company named Titan Sports Incorporated. Titan Sports would purchase the WWF in 1982 and would withdraw from the NWA again in 1983. McMahon would then start a strategy of trying to expand his territory across the United States. McMahon reached out to television companies in other territories, trying to get them to air WWF programming. This violated unwritten rules for the NWA territories, angering the other promoters. McMahon would then use this money to purchase the talent from other promotions. It was around this time in the AWA that a wrestler named Hulk Hogan appeared. Hogan had appeared in Rocky III in 1982 and would appear regularly in AWA wrestling, quickly becoming the biggest star in the promotion. However, Verne Gagne refused to make him AWA champion, seeing Hogan as not a good enough technical wrestler to be champion, although Gagne later denied this, stating that Hogan's pursuit of the title was a bigger draw than having Hogan as champion. Whatever the reason, Hulk Hogan left the AWA in 1983 and joined the WWF. The AWA was never the same again. Hulk Hogan was pushed to become the main attraction of the WWF, winning the WWF World Heavyweight Championship in 1984 by defeating the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden. WWF had their champion, they had some money, and they had popularity. The WWF would then begin promoting wrestling shows outside their Northeast territory, further breaking the unwritten rules of the territories. The NWA did try to counter the WWF's rise. On November 24, 1983, NWA's Jim Crockett Promotions, the North Carolina territory, held a closed-circuit wrestling event named Starrcade. This supercard had a main event which saw Ric Flair defeat Harley Race for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. This event was popular, made the company money, and would start an annual tradition. The WWF purchased Georgia Championship Wrestling in May 1984, taking one of NWA's most profitable territories and a lucrative television time slot. However, WWF's programming did not do well when it replaced GCW's show, and the television network aired other wrestling promotions instead. The WWF sold the time slot to Jim Crockett Promotions for $1 million, just under $3 million in 2023. In 1984, the WWF and MTV would start partnering in what has been termed the Rock and Wrestling Connection. This connection featured singer Cyndi Lauper and professional wrestlers both on WWF and MTV programming. Hulk Hogan, with actor Mr. T, would host an episode of Saturday Night Live in 1985 as well. This was all done to help promote a new venture by the WWF, Wrestlemania. Wrestlemania became the WWF's landmark show. Held at Madison Square Garden in front of over 19,000 fans, WrestleMania was broadcast on over 130 closed-circuit networks on pay-per-view. To help advertise the event, several celebrities were brought in, including Cyndi Lauper, Mr. T, Muhammad Ali, and Liberace. Vince McMahon risked a lot on this one event. It is said that not only the success of the WWF relied on the success of WrestleMania, the success of the entire professional wrestling industry may have relied on the event. Featuring some of the WWF's main talent, including a main event that saw Hulk Hogan and Mr. T defeat Rowdy Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, the event would be a massive success. The show would be seen by over 1 million people on pay-per-view. The event not only made the WWF a lot of money, it greatly boosted the popularity of both the WWF and professional wrestling as a whole. By the end of the year, Hulk Hogan appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine, the WWF began airing a new television show, Saturday Night's Main Event, on NBC in May, and their syndicated local show, WWF Championship Wrestling, gained more attention both in the United States and internationally. Hulk Hogan would get his own animated show in Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling, and the WWF would air a second pay-per-view, named the Wrestling Classic, in November. All this in 1 year. That is a brief history of professional wrestling through 1985, ending with the WWF gaining in popularity quickly. Once again, this is brief, and there are a multitude of wrestlers, territories, and stories that helped shape professional wrestling around the world that we do not have time to go over now. But with the history of professional wrestling now briefly told, it's time to briefly talk about how professional wrestling works on the surface level. Keep in mind that each individual match in each individual promotion may have unique or different rules that may change the structure of the match entirely, and that the behind-the-scenes goal of the wrestlers is to put on a good show and keep each other safe from legitimate injury. The ultimate goal of a professional wrestler on the surface is to defeat their opponent. This can be done in several different ways. The main two ways are either by pinning or submitting their opponent. Pinning an opponent means holding their opponent's shoulders down for a set period of time, typically 3 seconds. Submitting an opponent means forcing the opponent to quit, typically either by tapping their hands or by verbally quitting. Wrestlers can also be disqualified for breaking the rules, depending on the match. Professional wrestling typically takes place in a wrestling ring, which is similar to a boxing ring. The wrestlers are typically supposed to stay inside the ring when wrestling. Typically a pin, known as a pinfall, or a submission must happen inside the ring and away from the ropes. If a wrestler stays out of the ring for too long, typically a very long 10 seconds, the wrestler will lose by countout. While many wrestling matches are one-on-one contests, many other matches will involve teams, each in their own corner. These team matches will often only allow one member of each team to wrestle at a time, with other members of the team needing to be tagged in. This is referred to as tag team wrestling. While teams of 2 are the most common, any number of wrestlers can be on a team depending on the rules. To manage the action, there will be a referee in the ring. The referee acts as a mediator that enforces the rules of the match, counts pins, and checks for submissions. In many matches, the referee will be distracted or accidentally knocked out, which allows wrestlers to break the rules, such as using weapons against their opponent while the referee cannot see. Professional wrestling uses characters and personas in order to influence the audience to love or hate certain wrestlers. The good guys, known as baby faces or faces, typically follow the rules, appeal to the audience, and make comebacks to win the match. The bad guys, known as heels, typically find ways to break the rules, taunt the audience, and find sneaky ways to win the match. The role of the writers, or bookers, is often to have the baby faces go against the heels in several different matches in a long storyline that will get the audience invested in the rivalry. Wrestlers will also have different styles in the ring. Larger wrestlers will typically use their size and strength to wear down their opponent. Larger wrestlers tend to be favored in American wrestling, especially the WWF. Technical wrestlers will use their skill to put their opponents in uncomfortable and painful positions to wear them down and get them to submit. Technical wrestlers are often favored in Japanese and European markets. High-flying wrestlers use acrobatic and aerial skills to jump through the air to damage their opponents. These high flyers tend to be favored in Mexican wrestling. Most moves in professional wrestling are choreographed and extensively practiced by the wrestlers. As a result, these moves will be named. There are hundreds, if not thousands of moves, each with their own name, if not multiple names, depending on which wrestler uses it. Some wrestlers will have moves they prefer to use on their opponents. If they are unique enough, this will be considered their signature move. If they often use a signature move to defeat their opponents, this will be known as a finishing move, or finisher. That is a very basic rundown of how professional wrestling works, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, things are very different. There are a lot of legitimate injuries, legitimate medical issues, backstage politics, substance abuse, crimes, violence, and even murder in the history of professional wrestling. It is always important to keep in mind that the characters presented in professional wrestling are just characters, and that real, flawed people portray these characters. In 1985, the wrestlers themselves, however, are often instructed, if not forced, to keep the act up at all times, refusing to admit that professional wrestling is staged or fake, as it is often accused of. This act is known as kayfabe. The accusations that wrestling is fake has led to violent outbursts as the wrestlers try to protect the wrestling industry and their paychecks. In the world of video games, professional wrestling had not made much of an impact by 1985. Only one video game based on professional wrestling had been released before 1985. That was Tag Team Wrestling, an arcade game developed by Technos Japan and published by Data East in Japan in 1983 and North America in 1984. While not based on any specific wrestlers or any specific promotion, the spirit of the game closely mirrors the established rules of tag team wrestling. That will do it for the story of professional wrestling for now. My name is Ballerscuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we go between the ropes.